Hello and welcome again to my channel. Thank you for clicking on this video, and if you clicked on this video, you definitely want to know something about the UAE labor laws, the new UAE labor laws. So this is the second part of the video talking about the new UAE labor laws. The first part I had done previously, and this part is going to be concluding all the new introductions and tweaks to the labor laws that are presently in force in the UAE. So my name is Chinedu Abwe, and in this channel I bring to you tips, wisdom, keys, opportunities, job opportunities, business opportunities, everything that you require in order to prosper and to thrive and to do well in the UAE. Now let's dive straight to business. Now, another thing that has been introduced as part of the new UAE labor laws has to do with disciplinary measures. Disciplinary sanctions that are permitted include a non-disciplinary warning note, that's number one, a written warning, that's number two, 5 days wages being deducted from a person's salary, that's the third thing that is allowed, suspension for 14 days without pay, that's a fourth thing that is allowed under disciplinary measures. In the old UAE law, it was for 10 days, but in this new UAE law, it's allowed that you can suspend a person for 14 days without pay as part of your disciplinary actions or measures. And then the fifth thing that has been allowed is denying an employee salary increase for 1 year. Another thing also that has been added under disciplinary measures in the new UAE labor law is denial of promotion for 2 years, and then finally termination of employment. So these are the disciplinary actions that are allowed under the new UAE labor law that can be meted out by employers to employees. Now, in the new UAE labor law, as regards or under the category of termination of employment, there are certain conditions that have been also stipulated that allow employment to be terminated, and one of it is when the business or the organization files for bankruptcy or says that they are no longer able to do business, they are not making any income, they are not making any profit. So it is allowed that under those kind of circumstances, somebody's employment can be terminated. Also, another condition for termination of employment allowed is when for some reason, maybe government reasons or whatever, the establishment has been permanently closed. So maybe if they had an issue with government or whatever reason, not relating necessarily to bankruptcy, and the establishment is closed, then they can actually have to terminate the employment of their employees. A third condition is when the employee or the worker is not able to renew their work permits for reasons that are beyond the control of the employer, then the employer will have no choice but to terminate their employment. Now, there are certain conditions that allow for the termination of an employee's contract, and the conditions under this new labor law, Article 44, are as follows. Number one, notification by the employer to MOHE, the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, has to be given within a period of 7 days if there is any material loss that the employee, the worker, has caused the company, leading to the need to terminate that worker without notice. In the past, in the old law, it was 48 hours, but now it has been extended to 7 days. Another condition that would allow for termination of a worker's employment without notice is that before you terminate a worker's employment without notice, he or she must have been given at least 2 written warnings. So if he or she has not gotten 2 written warnings prior to dismissal, the employer does not really have the legitimate right under this new labor law to dismiss or terminate the employment of any employee without notice. Now, 2 new things were also added as regards termination of employment in this new labor law, and they are as follows. Whenever a worker or an employee misuses their position for personal gain, then the company is allowed to terminate that worker's employment without notice. A second condition is when a worker joins another company without properly exiting from their existing company. Then that existing company can terminate their employment without notice. A third new thing that was added in Article 44 is that an employee, actually a worker, can on their own terminate their employment if there is a breach of contract between them and the employer. But the condition stipulates that before they terminate their employment without notice, they should have at least given the employer a 14 days remedial window. What does that mean? Before they get angry, a worker gets angry and just terminates his or her employment, they should inform the employer that these are the issues that I have a grievance with, and give at least a 14-day interval for the employer to rectify things and resolve things. Now, another new thing that was introduced in this new UAE law is regarding end of service entitlements, like end of service gratuity. And the following things were stipulated. Number one, gratuity entitlements apply only to foreign nationals. It does not apply to Emiratis. A second thing also that was introduced as a change is that the calculation of the end of service gratuity is based on working days, not calendar days. A third thing that was also introduced is that there is no reduction in the gratuity of the employee on account of the employee's resignation. So no employer is allowed to punish an employee or a worker because they resigned by reducing their gratuity. Is not allowed. Then a fourth thing also that was introduced is that even if there is a termination of an employee's employment without notice, no matter the reason for the termination, that employee's gratuity remains intact. So whether the employee was terminated for any reason whatsoever, nothing should touch the end of service gratuity of the employee. Another thing that was introduced is that if an employee is terminated unlawfully, if an employee contract is terminated unlawfully, the employee actually is entitled to get compensated by the employer for it. So if you file a case, if you are an employee and you feel that you justifiably have a case against your employer for terminating your employment, once you submit a serious complaint to the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization, and they look at it and review it and find that your complaint has validity, your employer will compensate you for unlawfully terminating your contract. And this compensation will be in addition to your end of service gratuity. The compensation is capped at a maximum of 3 months your normal salary. So your 3 months salary is the cap for that compensation. Another thing that was also stipulated in this regard is that the employer must pay these compensations within 14 days of your termination notice. So once they give you a termination, or they give the employee a termination, from the date of that termination, 14 days is counted, and the employer has to pay that compensation within that time. Then a new introduction also is called restrictive covenants. And what restrictive covenants is basically talking about is conflict of interest. So what the new UAE law stipulated in the area of restrictive covenants is that if an employee leaves a company, a non-compete clause of 2 years comes into effect. Now, what does that mean? Let's say, for example, you're working in a company and you're very skilled in an area, and you leave the company to start your own. If care is not taken, because of your level of skill, you may be competing with the company you left from. So, peradventure such a situation occurs, there is what is called a non-compete clause, which stipulates that at least for a period of 2 years, you're not supposed to start any business that will compete with the business of your old employer, especially if you're functioning within the same geographical location. Also, it is stipulated in this restrictive covenant law that if peradventure you leave a particular employer to join a competing company, the non-compete clause will still apply of 2 years. First of all, it has to be sure that the geographical location where this possible competition or conflict of interest may occur is well specified. Then the period of the restriction is also well specified. The 2-year period is a maximum period. So it has to be articulated what is the period of restriction that the employee is supposed to have to abide by in order not to be seen to compete with the employer that he or she is leaving. So in the old labor law, this restrictive clause had a shorter duration, and it created a couple of problems between employers and employees who left the company to start their own business or left the company to join a competitor. But now the new labor law has extended that period to about 2 years maximum. So that gives a long window for the employer that employed the employee to balance out after the employee has left and not feel threatened by the employee having joined a competing company or having started their own business to compete with the former employer. Now, note that any employer who violates the new labor law as regards terminating the employment of the employee, even if the employee decides to start their own business or enter a competing company, that non-compete clause will no longer apply. That restrictive covenant clause will no longer apply because they have already violated the new labor law. So the employee that is leaving will be exonerated from the non-compete clauses or the restrictive covenant law. Now, as regards employee policies, the following things have been introduced in the new UAE labor law, and they are as follows. Number 1, non-discrimination. So nobody is entitled or is allowed to discriminate against any person based on race, based on ethnicity, based on religion, based on gender, based on skin color, based on any reason whatsoever. The new labor law does not allow any form of discrimination of any employee in any way. Also note that pregnant women who are on maternity leave have the same entitlements as regular employees. The employer is not allowed to discriminate against them in any way. So a second thing that has been introduced based on employee policies is no person is allowed to harass any employee sexually, verbally, physically, psychologically, or otherwise. Any form of harassment is disallowed. And if an employee is caught harassing another employee in any form, that will attract an immediate termination of their employment without notice. And if care is not taken, the employer may be liable to pay some fines. A third thing introduced here as regards employee policies relates to maternity leave. The maternity leave days have been increased to 60 days of paid leave. 45 days will be fully paid salary, and then the remaining 15 days will be half salary paid. Now, if for any reason the employee wants to extend their maternity leave after the 60 days, it is allowed to extend it by another 45 days. But this time around, that extra 45 days will be without pay. So the first 45 days of the new 60-day maternity leave window will be with full pay. The remaining 15 days will be with half pay. If now the employee wants to extend it, you can extend it by another 45 days maximum, but it will now be without pay. In addition, the UAE has introduced some extra maternity leave entitlements for those that give birth to stillborn children or those that give birth to children that have disabilities. Then, as regards annual leave, the new UAE law stipulates that annual leave of 30 days must be used within the leave year. So you can't carry over your last year leave into this new year and decide to use 2 years leave at once in this new year. The leave window of 30 days must be exhausted within the leave year, within the year that leave is available for. Then there have been extra leave types introduced, and they're as follows. Bereavement leave. So bereavement leave has to do with a person who has lost a loved one, maybe a parent or a brother or a sister or a wife or a child. You have a bereavement leave number of days of 3 to 5 days. Then another leave type that has been introduced is study leave. The study leave has a window of 10 days and is only allowed for those who have completed at least 2 years of service with the company. Then finally, when parents have a new child, both the father and the mother are entitled to 5 days of leave. Now this is separate from the normal maternity leave that is 60 days for the mother. So the father can, at least for a period of 5 days, stay at home with the family after the birth of a new child. So these are the main items in the UAE labor law that I think are of worthy note for every person who is working here in the UAE. And please, if you like what you heard, if it has value it added to you, subscribe to this channel, click on the notification bell, and also put a comment down there and let me know what exactly resonated with you. You will also do well to also click the like button as well, because it helps the algorithm to boost this video to more people. Thank you so much for tuning in to the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.